Okay, welcome everybody. Baruch Hashem, here we are for another life skills series. As I'm sure you guys know, at Living Chassidus, we like to prepare women for women's things and women's topics. And many times I've had the experience that I know someone comes to me and says, I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known about, birth. I wish I would have known about dealing with fears of birth before the birth. I wish I would have known um, all these different things, the different options that I could use during birth and labor, and even during pregnancy. So we here are bringing midwives to come and bring up and discuss all these topics and give you guys the most amazing information. So today we have the incredible Mrs. Lindsey Mayo. She's a licensed midwife, an American College of Nurse Midwives certified nurse midwife, currently licensed as a midwife and registered nurse by the state of New York. Before embarking on her career as a midwife, she was a birth doula for 8 years. Lindsey's dream of becoming a midwife was cemented through her work with Family Care International, a New York-based nonprofit focused on making childbirth safer for people in rural and indigenous communities in Africa and Latin America. She received her bachelor's degree in political science and Spanish from the College of Charleston and has spent extensive time traveling through South America. Lindsey then completed a master's of midwifery at SUNY Downstate in New York City. Lindsey is now pursuing her continued education in advanced clinical herbalism through the Herbal Academy. That's so cool. I love that. Having been witness to all forms of birth in all birthing environments, she believes strongly in evidence-based care and client-centered birth practices. So here we have her. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully I sound good on a mic. Okay. Oh yeah, probably. Are y'all comfortable? I have long arms, so that's helpful.
Yes, and then we
Yeah.
can switch it.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I thought that we would kind of talk about some of the things that if you were to choose home birth, the responses that you get. People are like, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this happens? And then the statistics around those things happening. What would happen if some of those things happened? So any questions that you have heard or thoughts of things that people are scared of that you have questions about, I'm happy to answer them also.
Well, a common question is cord around the neck. What do you do?
Obviously. So about 25% of babies are born with some cord around their body. And usually what you do is you unwrap the cord from their body once they're born, and that's it. That's the end of the story. So how to explain that and some of y'all have maybe never seen an umbilical cord, but when a baby is born, their umbilical cord is purple and thick and juicy and twisted. And this twisting of it allows for it to have buoyancy so that even if it's wrapped in places that it is less likely to be compressed. So the cord being around the neck, around the body, I've seen a baby wrapped upwards of 5 times, and they come out and I just go like this.
All around the neck?
All around the neck, around the body, around the shoulders, around the foot. Now babies can get wrapped up because they're just in there playing mostly. That's what I assume that they're doing.
Can you talk about Wharton's jelly?
So the Wharton's jelly is part of that protective, I guess, what would we call it? Substance matter that's on the umbilical cord. So unlike our skin, it also is going to add to the protection piece. It covers the entire, Wharton jelly covers the entire vessels. There's 3 vessels in the umbilical cord in most umbilical cords, and it also acts as a protectant. It's a special protein.
What does it do? Like, what's its function with like not getting tangled?
It has something to do, it's more of a protection, and then I don't know the actual science behind what it's made of. My understanding is that it's a protein, but something along the lines of the pressure of the blood moving and the tension of the Wharton's jelly in the umbilical cord allows this twist. So for you, having seen a birth, you notice that when the baby comes out that the cord is usually coiled like this. And then by the time all the blood has flowed out of it, it's completely flat. But no one untwisted that cord, right? So that's part of the mechanism of protection. is this twist and this pressure allows for it to be compressed and for it to have this bounciness that the baby can bounce off of it and have it wrapped around them and still be protected.
Where is the jelly? Like, where is it found?
It is on the umbilical cord.
Sort of like the
Mhm.
exterior layer?
It's like skin. So rather than the vessels having skin on them, they have the Wharton's jelly on them. And that's the protective piece of the 3 vessels. That's the main thing. First and foremost, one of the things that I think is important to note is the education that a midwife has, because a lot of us, if we haven't really delved into it in the United States, are not really familiar with midwifery care as it's seen in every other country in the world. So when you're talking with your family, many people might be like, well, you should really go to a doctor, because they can do this, this, and this. The only thing that a midwife can truly not do, whether she works in a hospital or home, 98% of midwives do work in hospital settings across the United States, is surgery. I can do almost everything else that a physician could do on a labor and delivery unit aside from surgery. The minimum education you need to be a midwife in the United States is 7 years. To be a licensed midwife in New York State, rather, is 7 years. I went to school for 9 years. So when I come to your birth and when I tell you the things that I know, I've been to almost the exact same amount of schooling as any physician. But all of my education has been focused on midwifery, on women's health, and on childbirth. Whereas a physician, and physicians are great. There's a time and a place for physicians, of course. A physician is focused on the whole body and then comes just to labor and delivery. So our education is primarily focused on labor and birth and women's health being normal. About 80% of pregnancies start normal and end normal. And we don't have to do anything. Like, we could do nothing and your pregnancy will still continue. It's nice to have support to guide you. And my goal and a midwife's real job is to be able to point out if something is different. But if it's normal, we just sit back and relax and follow your cues, because you're the person who's physically experiencing this. And while I may have experience having attended births, I have never been you in your pregnant body with this baby. I don't claim to know what all of your desires are. And to me, when I'm given care, I don't just care about the baby and that you have a healthy mom and a healthy baby. I think if you went and asked any of your grandmothers, they likely remember how they were treated in labor. And I think we all deserve to be loved on top of receiving good care. And you don't necessarily get that when it's less personalized care.
How much birth-related training does a physician or like an OB get, specifically related to birth?
So, well, they do at least 4 years of residency. So they have so they do 4 years of residency, but that is going to cover all aspects of birth. And realistically, at the end of the day, a physician is a surgeon, and most of them are interested in the surgical portions of it. They're interested in the complications, and we need people who are interested in the complications. But if you are unilaterally focused on trying to fix something, you might get in the way of something that's working perfectly fine. On all other floors of the hospital, pain is something that we need to address. That means that there's something wrong and that we should fix it, right? Except on labor and delivery. Labor and delivery, that pain has a purpose, and we know that it has an end. And sometimes trying to fix that pain is going to get in the way of the hormonal cycle that is helping us produce a normal birth. And getting in the way of that pain could be someone turning the lights off and asking you what your middle name is that you've never met before in the middle of a contraction. That's hard when you're trying to focus on turning into 2 people. Which is, you're doing.
Yeah, that sounds difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like, I never thought of that. Like, oh.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you talk about mitigating the risk of shoulder dystocia,
Mm-hmm.
and like babies who have like bigger heads, like my baby's head is like the 90th percentile.
Yeah.
And also like during labor, my baby was facing like a unfavorable angle,
Mhm.
and if you were like in a moment where you realize that like the mom's baby could be like facing up
Mhm.
or to the side, like what are like different things that you do usually during birth?
So first and foremost, I think we put a lot of kind of a negative attention on the baby's position, as if that baby being in that position is wrong of them. I think we have to recognize that, one, this baby is a conscious being and is very active in the process. And it is quite possible that the safest way for that baby to come out of your body is to be in that position and work through it. So that's one of the reasons why at home, one of the last things I'm likely to do as an intervention is to break your waters, to open your waters, right? Because those waters might have the buoyancy to help that big fat head move around through your pelvis. The other thing that's important to note is if you had a normal pregnancy, even if your baby's in the 90th percentile, that might be the perfect percentile for you. That 90th percentile is a comparison of everyone in this room and outside of this room, which may not be appropriate for you and your partner's body type. Your pelvis isn't mobile, so if you are in a place where you feel supported to move in the way that your body wants you to move, your pelvis is going to move, allowing that baby to turn the ways that they need to. I've always thought that pain in labor, if you want to call it pain, ideally you call it intensity, and ultimately you call it your power, because it is a reflection of you and your baby coming together to do a really crazy thing that's amazing, that most people look back on and ideally feel really strong and powerful about how they had a baby. But the pain is going to help guide you into positions that are comfortable, and comfortable is not the right word, but that are more tolerable than other positions. Usually, if you're in a facility that has many other people who are also laboring, that they have to be mindful of how their baby's doing and how the mother's doing without them actively being in the room with you. They have you on a monitor. And in order for them to see everything they need to see, they will constantly like, lay on your back, lay on your back. I need you to lay down. And I would like for all of y'all at some point to take your hands when you're laying flat on your back on each side of your pelvis. That's your outlet if you're laying flat on your back. And if you bent over, you'd be like this. And that's a much bigger space for that maybe to move from. But if your provider's not comfortable or doesn't have time to monitor you in those ways, is that fair to you? Probably not. I'm going to go with it's probably not fair to you. And the other thing is, you know how they tell you never to lay on your back? Don't sleep on your back. The baby won't get enough oxygen. But when you're pushing, you're on your back, and then all of a sudden your baby's heart rate's going down. They're not getting enough oxygen. It's an emergency. Or they could just turn you over and you not be on your back, which is not a normal physiologic way to have a baby unless it feels right to you in the moment. Elephants don't get on their backs to have a baby. If you told an elephant to get on their back, you'd be like, we don't get in the way of other mammals, so why do we always get in the way of these mammals? For a healthy person, right? We are mammals at the end of the day. You had a question about, or somebody had a question about ultrasounds. And so my thoughts on ultrasounds are a standard of care. We use them a lot in this country. But generally, our recommendation is at least the 20-week anatomy scan. If you're going to get a scan, that's the scan where you can see basically the entirety of the baby. So they're going to look at all the parts of their heart and their brain, etc. But you can absolutely have a perfectly healthy and normal baby without ever having received a scan. We have to, at the end of the day, we've been having babies way longer than technology has existed. Like it's part of your blood to have a baby. 50% of your blood is your mom's blood. 50% of hers is her mom's. So it's literally in your DNA to have babies. Only about 4% of all births are breech births, but we consider it a variation of normal. It's a conversation. Everything in our practice is a conversation. We don't have hard nose to really almost anything. We don't require ultrasounds. We talk about the risks and benefits. My goal always, and any provider really should be, I think, that they are giving you all the information. And then you are making a decision that feels right for you with all the information. That is decision making. That's informed consent. Informed consent is not me saying, do this, get the Tdap. Everybody, they say you have to get it, you should go get it. It should be a conversation. What are your goals? What are your fears? And then we talk about what would be the most appropriate for you. This question says, is a natural birth too painful for the human body? Do you want to answer that? In the moment, some people might say yes, but usually afterwards they don't.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
Especially if you
Yeah.
Yes.
The first week, the first week people will be like, I'm never doing that again, ever, ever. And by the third week, they're like, I'm almost ready to be pregnant again. Like you're able to come out and like see what you did. That's kind of the beauty of a natural birth, is that it feels impossible and then you do it. And then you're like, oh, I can do anything.
Amen.
Yeah,
No, and it also can be really beautiful.
absolutely.
Even through something hard, my last two, I have 5 children, thank God. My last two were so incredible that I even right after I was like, that was insane. But I'm so happy. Like I'm so
Can I disagree?
Yeah.
go for it.
I have 2 kids, and my most recent, like the when I was giving birth on her, I was like trying to find the beauty in it. I'm like, whoever said this is beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
I hated every moment
Yeah.
of it. Like, so much pain. I don't know. Like I was like trying to breathe through it. It was.
But that
I
night,
couldn't see the beauty in it.
yeah, that
The
might
only
not.
beautiful thing was the baby that came out.
Exactly.
Right?
And that might not be, you don't have to find the beauty in it. So Chloe, who's another home birth midwife, kind of posted about her, or she posted about her birth stories on the internet, so I can say them out loud. But one of the things she talks about is how, like, some of the hormones that happen, endorphins specifically, can do 2 things. First off, they're a natural pain reliever. Even you'll still feel the pain, but technically they're dulling it. But they can cause euphoria, which is the beauty, it feels great, or they can cause dysphoria, which I hate it. I hate every bit of it. Dysphoria. So Chloe said in her second birth, which her second birth was also 48 hours long, that when she tried to find the beauty, when she tried to breathe through it and all the Instagram ways to have a baby, that it made it so much worse. And that when she finally started chanting, like, I hate this, this is the worst, that she found peace in it. And that was her way. And that's kind of the nice thing about home birth, is you can sit in my face and tell me, I want an epidural. And I'll say, well, you have to put pants on. And you're like, I can't do that. And then you have a baby. It doesn't have to be the moment of it doesn't have to be the most beautiful of it. But I would hope in reflection, you can still be like, but I did that. I hated it, but I still did it. And that there's value in that too, I think. Yeah. Campbell? Yeah.
And I think there's also the piece that we can get quote unquote better at it. Like my first 2 were really hard. Like I get that. But even also my last I danced. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
I got to dance. It was just
And
Wait, physically dance?
yeah.
Yeah, I danced through my labor. It was amazing. And I had really exciting music.
Seriously?
Well, you think, well, anything that is,
Like movement.
yeah.
Exactly.
The hormone that creates the contractions is also the hormone that creates love.
I just did dancing.
Right? So your highest points of pleasure, the highest points of pleasure that we experience in other parts of our life, is the same hormones and the same body parts of of labor and pregnancy, but times 200%. So theoretically, while extremely intense for even the euphoric people, you can have a really nice time. People can have a pleasurable birth, like physically pleasurable also. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that you talk about the fears and the things that you're scared of beforehand also, because they're going to come out regardless. So if you're able to find a provider or a community resource that you can say your fears out loud to people who are going to be non-judgmental and also give you statistics, then you can work through some of those things. And fear, I believe, and there's probably science, but fear makes pain more painful. For instance, if you go out in the winter and it's so cold and you go like this, then your whole body's cold and you're tense on top of it. But if you can be like, okay, it's really cold outside, let me just soften it. It's still really cold and we can accept that it's cold, but we're not holding that cold all over our body. And that's those little mantras that I think can help us get through labor, but I've never done it, so what do I know?
Or like when it's raining, you can either go out like this.
Yeah.
Or be like,
The rain's going to be there. It's going to happen regardless, but if we can, yeah. I mean, that's why having a provider who you really feel aligned with, and that does not have to be a home birth midwife. You do not have to have a home birth to have a good birth. But I do think who you choose to be at your birth is vital. And what's important is that you are choosing where you feel safe, not where you feel obligated to be, which I know is hard when we're working with partners and families who have different opinions. But at the end of the day, you're the one who has to physically do it. You're the one who's going to physically and emotionally remember how you were treated, how you felt, how your baby was treated. Because we're going to treat your baby pretty nice right in front of you and tell you all the beautiful things about your baby. And I really don't want to talk bad about hospitals, but I think we also all know that not many good stories come out of hospital births generally. And I think if we talk about the things that bother us at hospital births, that you can hopefully find other hospital providers that can give you the birth that you're looking for as well. Does that make sense? Well, I just think it's really important, more than where you give birth, it's who your team is, right? If you have a provider who you know is going to be there, who listens to you and takes time and answers your questions, and their philosophy aligns with your birth philosophy, that is a good provider alignment. Even, because some people's most comfortable way to give birth might be in a hospital with an induction, with an epidural and all of that. And that is fine, as long as you're choosing that out of knowledge and not out of fear.
And then, like you said, the question is, what's the likelihood of that provider being there?
Right. And do they even give you the opportunity to meet other providers who are potentially going to be there at one of your most vulnerable moments in your life,
Sometimes they're working in big practices.
Really big practices. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's I worked at Metropolitan, which is a public hospital, and there were 9 midwives. And while you might not get to meet all of them at the same time, you're having been to almost every hospital in the city, I still found that even though you may not have met them all, they were all practicing generally with the same philosophy, and you would generally get the same type of, I considered it loving care, at least with the midwives. That hospital has a 50% epidural rate with the midwives. So that right there is going to be a culture that is accepting of people making noise when they're in labor, which some hospitals would not be used to.
What's the usual rate?
97%.
Epidural?
Yes. Something like that. And let's see, people talk about emergencies at home and what do we do? Yeah. What if this happens? And then it just happens? Because it doesn't usually just happen. It's usually okay, that's happening, and then this is happening, and then this is happening. And ideally at some point in those happenings, we've already made decisions to go to a hospital before you get to this happened. Yeah. A healthy pregnancy, a healthy pregnancy, 80% of pregnancies are normal, period. That's it. 80% of pregnancies are normal. No matter what type of body you have, where you grew up, none of those things. 80% of pregnancies are normal. And I mean, you can't say never, but generally speaking, things do not go from 0 to 100. And we're monitoring your baby in the way that the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology recommends us to, unless you absolutely refuse, because you can do that too. If you don't want to be monitored, I'm like, you understand the risk? And you say yes. And then I'm like, okay, great. You know?
How many births a year do you transfer?
Our rate ranges from 5 to 12%. And first-time parents are more likely to transfer. During COVID, it went down as low as 5%. And that's because transfers are rarely for a real emergency. Transfers are often for pain management with first-time parents, because you had a long labor, because you're tired, because you need some rest. That's the primary reason for transfers. And if you are to start labor at home, even if you were to, okay, this is a good statistic. So in a hospital, across the United States, the average is about 30 to 33% cesarean rate. In New York City, with 23 out of the 27 home birth midwife practices, if you start labor at home, the cesarean rate is 4.6%, which is significantly different. And it's not that we're doing anything different, it's that we're probably doing less. And we'll do anything that's necessary, but we're probably doing a lot of things that aren't necessary. Like, you don't necessarily need an IV in your arm. You have a mouth, you know how to drink water, and this is uncomfortable.
Is that literally all that's coming through that IV drip?
Until they start Pitocin. But yeah.
What's if you want that home birth experience, but I'm afraid of it, and want to stay at home as long as possible, but then give birth at a hospital, that's just like towards the end.
Yeah, I mean,
your own terms.
I
You know, like when to go, and
I mean, I guess when it feels really intense, but the more babies you have, the potential, the shorter that time is going to be, and the more likely you are going to have a baby in your car, which is a good birth story. And I mean, that's not a bad thing. It just meant that it was going well enough for you to feel comfortable at home, and that then this normal birth just happened to progress in the back of the cab. And everybody has a good story.
Is it necessary then to go to the hospital?
Well, and then I would be like, be careful which hospital you go to, because certain hospitals will take your baby from you if you birthed outside of the hospital walls, just as a policy.
What does it mean, take your baby?
Like to evaluate them in another room. Yeah.
I don't know why the birth certificate says what kind of delivery was, and it goes home birth and what people's planned about.
It's statistics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the planned versus unplanned is important, because sometimes they like to put out statistics about how dangerous home birth is, but the statistics that they're using include people who accidentally birthed at home at 23 weeks. That statistic does not apply to a healthy person who's 37 weeks or more pregnant. And they use those statistics as a form of propaganda to continue to scare you.
Yeah. Can I offer, what was your name? You were asking about the question.
Like how to know when to go. I wanted.
Professional doula, like,
Mhm.
there, like, now it's time. And she knows because she does it for a living.
She might know.
Still,
And sometimes I compare.
Mhm.
I guess
My
being-
birth.
Yeah. And even yeah. Oh, sorry. Even me, when I go to a birth, like if I'm talking to one of the other midwives, we always say, where do you think they are? And we always respond somewhere between 2 and 8 centimeters. Because people present so differently, and who am I to know what's going on inside of your body? I don't know. I can assume based on how you're moving and sounding, but It's
that
never
because you
guaranteed.
burn off the check?
I don't feel like there's much value in doing a cervical exam unless you want one, or unless it is appropriate for decision making. I will also say that if you show up to the hospital last minute, like you're fully dilated and you're about to have a baby, it might be pure chaos.
Why?
Because they're like, she's fully dilated, run to the back. Everybody has to like, it's just a heightened intensity rather. That's all. And I think it's unfortunate, and we said this on the phone, like a quote that I say is, I really think it's unfortunate that you have to prepare for war to have a peaceful birth. Like I have to have my doula on this, my husband on this, I have to be able to say no to this. And I mean, your brain shouldn't have to be thinking about all those things, about how to protect yourself in the place where you're supposed to be healing.
I
Yeah.
have 2 questions. You just reminded me. What's the whole B-strep thing where like you have to get onto antibiotics?
The group.
Second, you come into the hospital. Yeah.
So evidence-based birth is a great resource to look up those types of things also. Do you want to finish the question?
I don't think I forgot it already.
Sorry.
I don't remember.
But more or less, group B strep is a bacteria that is in our gut, and our guts are connected to our guts, which are right next door to where we have our babies, the vaginas. So in the United States, we test for group B strep at 36 weeks. And if you're positive, the standard of care is penicillin, unless you're allergic, at least 2 doses, at least 4 hours before you have your baby.
Do midwives who birth at home do the same?
If you want them,
And if you don't?
nope.
And if you're allergic to penicillin?
I mean, we don't ever give penicillin. We have other meds that we would use. We use generally ampicillin, but if you were allergic to penicillin and you did want the antibiotics, we would, it's just another antibiotic.
Yeah.
To which part?
Group B strep.
To the group B strep? Well, yeah. But I will say that there are other countries that have better birth rates and outcomes than we do that don't even test for it. So that's first and foremost. And also, I can guarantee you that there is a reason why we are biologically meant for our baby to generally come out with its face facing our rectum. And if we're on antibiotics, there is no microbiome for that baby to take in. And a baby is born with a naive gut, which means they don't have the same bacteria. And when they come through the birth canal, they are taking in that bacteria, swallowing it, and it is helping start their digestion and their immune system, because our immune systems generally start in our gut. So a baby who's been exposed to antibiotics, while may never be exposed to GBS, will also not be exposed to the good bacteria to help them jumpstart their immune system and the digestion. Now, by 2 years old, the babies are on the same level, whether they got antibiotics or didn't. That's what the studies say. If you are GBS positive, okay, here's another one. If you are GBS unknown, like you didn't test for GBS and you walk in, yeah, you can say no to literally anything. You can say no to something that would save you and your baby's life legally. That doesn't always feel like you can do that. That's that whole like having to, have a war to have a peaceful birth, or at least have the things that you want respected. Sometimes you have to fight for them. GBS, if you are GBS unknown and you're full term and you walked into a hospital, they would not give you antibiotics. The standard of care, if we don't know if you're positive or negative, is not to receive antibiotics unless your waters have been open for 18 hours. That's when you would get antibiotics. Statistically, I believe it's about a 1% chance of a baby born to someone who is GBS positive of being sick, of getting very sick, which they treat with antibiotics. About 1%. So it's that.
I had it when I was giving birth. I had group B strep, and they were like threatening me.
But you didn't have group B strep. You were colonized. You were not infected.
Right.
That's something to be the differentiation of Colonized just means it's there. Infection means it's not, it's,
Like a fever.
yeah. That's what we're scared of, is the infection portion. The colonization, you could be colonized today and technically on the day of your birth, 2 weeks later, be negative. Or you could be negative on the day you test and be positive the day of birth, because it can come and go.
So it's not even that you're presenting with an infection.
No, you're
So
not
even if
you
you're
are,
colonized,
it's prevention of a possible infection is what they're going for.
What are the statistics for like testing positive for colonization?
I think it's about 25% of people.
So quarter does not find it.
Yeah, I think so. It might be a little bit less. Now, if you had GBS in your urine, that's a higher colonization. Or if you were GBS positive and you had multiple yeast infections or multiple UTIs, you might have higher colonization. So maybe for you, there would be, you would, when you were thinking, should I take antibiotics? You're like, well, I might have a higher colonization, which maybe would raise your risk. And then you make a decision with that information, right?
Dying from increased stress.
Excuse me? Yes. Mhm. And we do all of our visits at your house. So we come to you. Yeah.
I have a question as a ignorant to the hospital system as a patient. Can you be refused care if you deny some of these tests?
No, not in labor. They technically cannot refuse.
But prior to.
Yeah, they could fire you. The practice could fire you. Yes. If they felt uncomfortable, but I mean, we could, my practice could too. If there's a misalignment and I don't feel safe with, then it's not safe for me to give you care. You want someone who feels confident in your care. The bigger issues is when you start refusing things for the babies, like refusing antibiotics in a hospital setting. Depending on the personnel that day, they could maybe require your baby to be in the NICU for 2 days for monitoring, which is like, but that's a threat.
and if
If you refuse that, depending on who you are dealing with, technically healthcare providers are mandated reporters. And if they thought it was important enough, they could technically report you. Like CPS, Child Protective Services. But that's for the vitamin K and for the erythromycin, because the CPS was like, stop wasting your time, more or less. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, legally, you can say no to everything, but it doesn't feel that way. This question is it worth it to get an epidural versus a natural birth? I'll let other people answer this too, but I think there's a time and a place for every type of intervention that we have offered to us. I think there is a value in pain, and you get to the other side of pain and you feel hopefully proud of yourself at the very least. But there is a point where an epidural could be a strategy of sorts. If your pain is transitioning to a place of suffering, then that might be a time to reevaluate how you're managing your pain during labor, because that's an invitation for trauma. And one of the things is that we're trying to do is to avoid trauma. And that is a great time to get an epidural. Some people love their epidurals. They love them. And that is also totally fine. I think is it worth it? I think that's subjective. And I think that depends on if you think it's worth it. I do know that whenever you employ an intervention, your body is going to have to compensate in some way, whether positively or negatively. An epidural, you're likely going to now be immobile. You're going to stay in your bed. So that means your pelvis, unless you are being helped by staff members, is not being moved, which means your baby is going to have to work a lot harder to get in the positions they need to get in, because now they're just doing it by themselves. And also makes your blood pressure lower, which means that your placenta is not getting the same amount of oxygen, which makes the baby's heart rate go down as well. They can compensate for that, but that's something that happens, and sometimes you can't recover from that.
What are the effects of epidural on the baby?
They say there are no effects of the epidural on the baby. And theoretically, it's not supposed to pass through there, but your baby is a part of you. They share the same body. I mean, to me, a baby born to someone with an epidural versus a baby born to someone without an epidural, the babies act the same. In my experience, I didn't notice any difference in the babies, but that doesn't.
Their heart rate
How long
goes
ago?
down.
But yeah, but that's like a side effect. It's not like the actual epidural. It's the side effect of it.
Changed recently?
Yeah, I think but that's going to be hospital by hospital, I'm sure too. There is like fentanyl in most of them now. Fentanyl because it has a shorter half-life. Yeah. But generally, none of these things are going to your brain. So it's not like opioids. When you think of fentanyl, it's not the same type of fentanyl that people, I mean, it is the same type, but it's not going to your brain. It's not going to make you do the deep lean or anything like that. Sorry. You know, they're doing it on a nerve. So it's blocking from a certain point down. So it is affecting your body in a different way than other opioids. And just in my experience, the babies, they act the same.
Are you
Only at home?
yes.
Yes, I'm full-time at home, and every now and again I show my face at the hospital to work a shift here and there.
Which one?
Metropolitan, the one I've always worked at. It's on 97th and First Avenue. They have the lowest C-section rate in the whole state. Yep. Woodhull is second.
What's their C-section rate?
Well, primary C-sections, the last statistic I read was 11%, and Woodhull was 13, something like that.
And they use wireless monitoring?
At Met they had wireless monitoring. They have nitrous. They have birth balls. They have peanut balls. Their rooms are huge, private. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What's
What is
that?
that?
In London, that's like the
Yeah.
standard. All my sister-in-laws
Yeah.
and brother-in-laws that are with
Yeah.
them are like,
Yeah. I mean, it's not used that often because everybody's like, just get an epidural. Because that's just the culture of it. Yeah. It is. We stopped it during COVID, and now they're using it again.
What's your practice?
My home birth practice is called Midwifery Care NYC. Yeah, really classic.
So before you were asking, like, what are some of the common questions, like,
Mhm.
you say home birth, and I know.
Everybody's like, eh.
Right?
Yeah.
I think one of those common questions I get, like you said, what if something happens,
Mhm.
which I think you addressed, and what about hemorrhage?
Yep. So, and then your shoulder decision. Yeah, you're welcome to hemorrhage. Absolutely. Yeah. We have all the same medications that they have at the hospital. Pitocin, which we would give as a shot, Methergin, and Cytotec, and tranexamic acid. Those are also the medications that they use at the hospital should you hemorrhage.
What if someone needs a blood transfusion?
Well, then we'll transfer. Yeah, then I would transfer you. The last time.
For anyone who's
Mhm.
new, what does it mean to hemorrhage, and why would these things,
So the medical definition of hemorrhage is losing more than 1 liter of blood after the baby is born. Generally, if you are and what's 1 liter of blood, or losing enough blood where you have symptoms, and symptoms might be heart racing, low blood pressure, and feeling dizzy. Those are your main symptoms. Why would someone hemorrhage? A long labor, potentially a larger baby, and sometimes it just happens. If you've had a bunch of babies, you're technically at a higher risk for hemorrhage, but the body's really smart. So generally, if we don't get in the way, then most things work out how they're supposed to. If someone is actively bleeding, we of course address it, and we go a stepwise with the medications, and then there are physical things to also, you massage the uterus. If we do all those things, give them bags, because we will do IVs at home. We just don't routinely do them. So we'll give them fluids. If after that they're still dizzy, can't really get to the back, can't walk to the bathroom, etc., that's usually when we would discuss a transfer for the possibility of a blood transfusion. And most people feel a lot better after a blood transfusion, but I would never personally feel comfortable if you're dizzy and you can't walk to the bathroom. I cannot leave you at home. You know, that's not safe for you or for your ability to parent your child. Also, your milk is a blood product. So if you lose too much blood and are not that you have to get a blood transfusion, but are not replenished in fluids, then that will also affect your milk supply. So I like to be mindful of that too.
Do you see any correlation between routine Pitocin given after childbirth really in the hospitals with any hemorrhage or any issues?
The biggest issue I've seen with the routine, you call me in 9 months. With routine Pitocin is that if they do it too early, the placenta gets stuck in there sometimes. And now I can't get the placenta out. And now I have to turn off the Pitocin and go get the placenta, which is generally considered uncomfortable. To say the least, exactly. That's the main thing. Now, prolonged use, Pitocin is not FDA approved for induction of labor. It is only used for hemorrhage control, but we use it extremely routinely for induction of labor. We do a lot of these things in labor and delivery obstetrics that are not
in the hospital kind of practice or in your home birth practice?
well, home birth. We don't use Pitocin in labor ever, because a baby who is being exposed to Pitocin routinely during labor needs to be monitored because they're more likely to be affected by the Pitocin and the intensity of it, their ability to oxygenate, than they would just a normal contraction.
Is it legal to use Pitocin?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They're making tons of money on it. Yeah.
Literally, like how is that? They just go like.
I don't know exactly how, but I would assume some of it has to do with us being women and how healthcare does not study women, does not study the effects of women, and labor and birth, especially for certain minorities, has been a time of experimentation. Just a little soapbox, I would say. Yeah, I mean, obstetrics was founded on violence and lack of consent, realistically. Our modern obstetrics, at least.
Shoulder dystocia.
Yep. So shoulder dystocia is more likely to happen if,
Can you define it?
a shoulder dystocia is when the head comes out, the shoulders do not, and the technical definition is that the provider has to do some form of intervention to release the shoulders from coming out. You are at higher risk for shoulder dystocia if you have uncontrolled gestational diabetes or any type of diabetes for that matter. If you've had a shoulder dystocia before, technically, if you and your partner are very disproportionate in size, like if you're a tiny little creature and your partner's 7 foot, then it's possible that that baby's going to have a hard time coming out. If you have any type of intervention, like a surgical vaginal birth, which would be like a vacuum or forceps, and then being on your back, because that's a smaller pelvis for that baby to come through.
Why does diabetes have to do with that?
Because if a baby is exposed to uncontrolled sugar levels, they grow faster. And when they do, they put on more weight disproportionately in their neck and their shoulders. So that part particularly is larger. So we want to make sure your sugars are good. We do a test around 28 weeks for that also.
Is that mandatory?
No, it's not mandatory, but we talk about those risks and the risk that if you do have uncontrolled sugars and your baby is born, they might go into a shock because they're not being exposed to sugars. But we're going to see symptoms of this even if you decline the test. Like your belly is going to likely be disproportionately large. And at some point, we're going to have to say, we need to explore this further, or it's not going to be safe to be at home. My goal is not for you to have a home birth. My goal ultimately is for you to have a home birth if it's still safe for you to have a home birth. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm really popular. Okay.
also in midwife last week. If you want to check out the recording, she also spoke a lot about shoulder dystocia.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, and the Gaskin method.
well, if you want to see me in action, one of our clients posted her shoulder dystocia on Badass Mother Birther.
Oh,
Yeah.
One coming out of the pool or that's
Yeah, she came out of the pool. Yeah, and someone said that I was mean to her, but I was not.
You discussed that in
Yeah,
your training too.
when you're in labor, you cannot hear me. And if I say, "Can you push for me? Can you lift your left leg?" You don't know what a left leg is. You know? So I have to say push, here, move, this, very direct and clear so that she recognizes that I'm not suggesting something to her, that I would really, really strongly prefer for all these actions to happen somewhat quickly. But for her, like, yes, technically it was a shoulder dystocia because there was an intervention, that intervention being simply movement. I asked her to move her pelvis in ways that help that baby turn. But it wasn't one that I needed to go inside of her body and turn the baby all around and cut her, which there are times for that too.
That was one where like you pulled her out. I'm just trying to think of the other video I saw, like where she came out of the pool.
So no, I didn't have to resuscitate the baby. So basically, if you see the video, what you're seeing, she's sitting back in the pool, something like this, and the head's already out. And when the video starts, we are now on our second contraction. So the baby came out with the first contraction, and on the second contraction, we expect the body to come out. And the body didn't. So that's when I was like, okay, now we should do something, because we've had a time has allotted. We have allowed for the physiological movements of this baby to happen, and she didn't initiate them. So we just encouraged her a little bit, and then she came out.
What's it called?
Badass Mother Birther. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that your turn?
That's her name is, yeah, her name is Floor Cruz. She's a huge birth advocate and like real popular. Is there a way to prevent tearing? Yes and no. The best way to prepare yourself to be less likely to tear, in my opinion, is to have a high protein diet. Prepare your tissue to have that elasticity, those collagen levels. Your tissue tends to just be a little bit more resilient. There have been multiple studies about whether applying pressure or having my hands ready or being completely hands off at the time of birth, and it makes no difference. Statistically, you are more likely to tear in an upright position, but you're less likely, but you're also more likely to have to push for a lot less time. So what we do, which is not easy, is when the baby is coming here, we're just reminding you to slow down. Slow, 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 slow. And that's when you like us the least. And all you have to do is get the ears out. That's the biggest part. You just manifest the ears. Once you get the ears out, ideally it should be much simpler after that.
At that point, you're not thinking.
Yeah. And also it should be of note. So everybody's heard of the ring of fire, right? So that's when the baby's coming out. That ring of fire is essentially the max you can be stretched. And when you are stretched like that to that maximum, after that you feel the burn, technically at that point your nerves are no longer getting oxygen because everything's so stretched, and you go into a physiologic numbness. So most people don't actually feel if they tear the actual moment of it, because their body has been kind to them and numbed the area before the final push. The recommendation is at least 60 grams, which I don't know. I don't know how people, she can tell you. Yeah. I mean,
feel like they're gonna vomit, I have heard.
Yeah, I've heard that also. But, we're getting more research. A lot of the research about nutrition and medications and how they affect things are based on white men. And now we're finally starting to get some research about how things affect us and how we might need more protein and to function better. So,
Have you ever found perineal massage to be helpful?
I think first, not in the sense, I know there's some stats, but I just want to make it really clear that you could do nothing and still have a perfectly fine birth. Like you could do nothing. I mean, ideally, you should walk around and eat and stuff like that, but like you don't need to express colostrum at 33 weeks. That's a TikTok trend. You can do it, but that's brand new. That came out this year. What were we just talking about? Perineal massage. I think the value in it is because you don't need to be stretched. You have hormones, you're going to stretch, like it's meant to work. I think there might be some value in understanding what that sensation may feel like, so that when you approach that sensation, that you don't just try to explode through it, because
Or avoid it and hold the baby
yeah,
for a long time.
yeah, just like so that you're aware of it. I'm like, yep, that's it. That means your baby's here. You don't have to like it, but we welcome it because we're almost done, right? And then you have the baby.
But are doing all these things like 100% foolproof? Or you're not gonna-
No,
No way.
no, nothing is. No one knows any of those things. I mean, granted, your birth story's already been written. It just hasn't been read to us yet, but it's already out there in the world. Less common is tearing less common with the second child? Yeah, I would say pretty less common. We had someone recently who with their last birth had a shoulder dystocia, and it was a hospital birth, but she had a shoulder dystocia and a 3rd-degree tear, which means there's some butt involvement. This birth went so beautifully that her husband caught the baby before the midwife got there, no tears. And no one did anything. And it just happened because it's beautiful like that. How to not worry about all that can possibly go wrong during labor. Don't become a midwife. Yeah, that's one of them.
I did even.
What happened really is my best friend got pregnant, and then I just followed her, and we were like, 23 or 24. I was here, and I was with her the entire time. And I was at her birth. She had an unmedicated birth. I didn't really think they treated her very kindly, but she had an unmedicated birth. And then my mom said, well, if you can support somebody you love, you can support anybody. But I ended up loving like everybody I support anyways.
Aww.
At least for a little bit. Well,
Reality.
no, they're allowed to yell at me as long as they're not mean to me, because I'm sensitive.
But Lindsey doesn't go to very many births, though.
Yes, I do.
That's a lot of births.
I've gone to like all of them this year. That was back then. If you want to get re-pregnant now, we can try again. But I do think how not to worry about, everybody's brain is different. For me, like we have these fear things, the cord wrapped around the neck. But if I say, yeah, but 25% of babies are born that way, and most of us are still here, like, yeah, exactly. Like that should help kind of soften it. So that's why I think it's important you talk about your fears beforehand, so that we can counteract with statistics or talk through why you might have that fear. Did your mom have that fear when she was pregnant? Because those things can affect us too. We're all connected. You shared a body with another person who may have had a traumatic birth. When you were born, it may have been traumatic, and that's something you might hold in your body too, I feel like that was good. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
No, we can't do a blood transfusion at home because I don't have blood. You have to get blood from the blood bank. That's too much pressure. Well, if you have a partner who has the same blood type, y'all could set it up at the hospital beforehand. But when we talk about blood transfusions, and I don't know what y'all's experience is with, I can think of one client who we transferred to have a blood transfusion in the past 7 years. So it's not like super common. I'm not saying it can't happen. You can certainly hemorrhage and not need a blood transfusion. But there is a time and a place where it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate, but you can still say no to it. What's the best position to give birth in? it's the position that your body tells you to. At the end of the day, it is the position that your body tells you to get in. A lot of people do end up in all fours, but most people, most people are squatting on their knees, usually in some way, like a little bit upright, or we have a birth stool. So they're sitting as if similar to how you sit on a toilet. But there's no right way. Like the discomfort, I think, helps guide you in the way that you're like, no, I have to be in this position.
Do they let you in the hospital? Like nothing is like.
They should.
That you feel comfortable?
There should be no language allow and let. There's a hierarchy in certain systems that should not exist. At the end of the day, when you were at a hospital, you remember that you paid their bills, you hired them. They are your employee. But somehow it's all mixed up where they tell us what to do. Y'all have paid my rent and for my car for years. Yeah, exactly. Because it's really intense what I'm saying.
You can refuse monitoring.
You can refuse everything, but I've also seen someone who refused first off, if you're refusing all those things, why are you planning for a hospital birth? One, that's something to evaluate. Maybe it's because you don't. In New York, we're lucky because even Medicaid pays for home birth, right? Other states they don't have that. So there might not be an option if we're being financial option. I have seen people decline things for reasons that for them felt really important. For the doctor, he thought it felt insane and he did a psych consult. And this is a woman who refused Pitocin. Yeah, she would have rather had a C-section than Pitocin, which is her right to make that choice. And he was like, well, she's clearly crazy. So there's that.
And you're saying Pitocin for
labor.
reduction,
Yeah, to augment her labor. You don't have to, okay, this says I get nervous from focusing on my breathing. Is there another way to breathe through contractions? Just breathe in and out. There's no right way to breathe. All you have to do is oxygenate your body. You cannot birth wrong. You literally can't. If you crawl across the finish line at a marathon, you still finish the marathon, right? You're allowed to yell. Everybody has a different version that helps them cope through it. There's no right way.
Also, I've seen a lot of women more vocalizing than like breathing.
Yeah.
Usually I see women more making sounds.
And as I was saying earlier, also that you have like an image like quiet, and, but like the last 2 births I danced.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was so fun. It was.
Yeah.
So there's different versions of birth depending on what you need and what works for you.
And social media is not real. Those are all the romanticized versions that have been edited. And when the music's playing, it's because she's yelling. That's what's actually happening. Very rarely do we have someone who is actually quiet, like truly quiet through the whole thing. Any noise, and your neighbors don't care. Only one time have I ever had a neighbor come knock on the door and he was like, oh, sorry, I didn't know that's what y'all were doing. Yeah, and that was it. Yeah, your neighbors definitely don't care.
And many times they don't even hear.
No, they really don't. And because you're always way louder in your head than you are to everyone else. You're way louder in your head. So you don't have to focus on breathing. You can scream, you can, yeah. There's all these strategies, like they're like, oh, do this method, do hypnobirthing, do this. Yes, you can do all those things, but maybe when you're in labor, maybe you actually have a foul mouth and hypnosis sounds like the worst idea to you and you spend all that money on it for nothing. But that's okay, because it's a strategy that you could potentially put into use at another point in your life. It's just true.
Is it hard to give birth in an NYC apartment, like space-wise?
No, I don't think so. And like the biggest house that I've ever been to, she had a 5-story brownstone, like all theirs. It was all theirs. They could have gone anywhere. Master bedroom, guest, anything. She gave birth in the basement in like the guest bathroom, the smallest room in her entire building that she owned, the smallest room. 5 of us were in there like this. Just like, well, I think it's a protection thing. You think about an unperturbed cat. They're rarely in the middle of a living room with all the lights on while they're birthing their babies. They're going to a place where there's walls that is protecting them, and then they face the other way. And so the New York City apartment is actually perfect because we're surrounded by walls. Yeah, you're completely protected. What were you gonna say?
I was also thinking cat.
Yeah, always a cat. The fun parts of my job, all of it, obviously. I mean, babies are cute, but I really prefer the moms. And there's an evolution, and I love when they do it and they learn that they did it. And the humanity, like I go from, someone in this neighborhood to someone in the Bronx, and everybody's doing the exact same thing, even though we're like completely different. Oh, we're so different, but we're not different at all. Everybody's doing exactly the same thing, worried about the same things, complaining about the same things. That's the fun part, is that you really do have an insight of how we're all the same. And I also like seeing people's apartments. Yeah. I go all over the city, all types of people, all types of apartments. I get fed by so many different types of people. It's fun. That part's fun. Yeah. Yeah. And then whenever I go anywhere, people are like, "Oh, you're a midwife? That's so cool." And then I get to, that's fun too. But yeah, I think it's all kind of fun. It's a little stressful.
How many births did you go?
This month I haven't gone to any, but I was telling, yeah, I did. My boyfriend was in town, so it's different. I was on a little vacation, but I did almost all of them in January, February, and March. But Julia did most of them in April and May. That's for sure. Our practice is 3, and we range between 5 and 8 to 10, depending. Depends on how many first-time parents versus second-time parents, because we take all-time parents. But generally, a first-time parent will need a little bit more from us, which we're happy to give, but we just want to make sure we're not overbooked if we have a lot of first-time parents.
It's not 10 first timers.
No, we're not. No, I have to sleep too. No. A first-time parent is likely to need a little more guidance with breastfeeding, and that's just an expectation. So we want to make sure that if we have several first-time parents, we're on the lower end of our census. That's all. Oh, can we talk about women's instincts in childbirth? That's everything I've been talking about this whole time. Your body is generally totally meant to do this. And listening to your gut and having someone who's willing to listen to you, who doesn't make you nervous, I think it just creates a far more intimate relationship and ultimately a more peaceful and trusting birthing experience, even if we transfer to the hospital, even if an emergency happens. Like it feels like we're in it together. You know about my life. I come to your home. I'm your guest, and that kind of pulls the hierarchy too. I mean, you can tell me if you think differently. I think it makes a difference. Yeah, I think coming into your home is a special thing. And also, if I ever have a baby, I want to make sure that my karma's so that my midwife will come to my home and I don't have to go to a clinic.
It's really nice because having someone come to your house lets you feel like they're coming to your space as opposed to like you submitting, so to speak.
Exactly. Which to me is how it should be. At the end of the day, you hired me to do a service for you. And I get it. Like, yes, I might know some things on paper, but you know what's going on in your body way better than I do. Way, way better. Like,
you don't hear doctors say that.
Yeah, but it's true. Like there are plenty of studies that show that the person who is usually the most correct about the weight of a baby, is the mom, assuming that she's had other babies. I'm not saying that you're going to sit here and say, this baby's 8 pounds, 6 ounces. I'm saying you're going to be like, this baby's heavier than my first baby. And you're more likely to be correct than the ultrasound, right?
When does the mom know that?
I tell her.
Don't say when.
Oh, whenever. I could ask you at 28 weeks if you're feeling the weight of the baby, you're like, oh yeah, this feels heavier. And then, you know, you get to 38 weeks and you're like, yeah, I think this baby's bigger or smaller. And you are often right, because it's the same pelvis and you know what it feels like, because you're the one walking around with it and sleeping with it and being one and for the next long time, really.
A question I get asked a lot is what's the difference between a midwife and a doula?
So a midwife is a medically trained professional, and a doula is a emotionally and physically trained professional, if you will. I think it's a perfect team balance. There's little things like they say the doula's above the belt. So they are helping you find, and doulas are valuable in all scenarios, but if you have a provider who doesn't have the time to provide you resources, that's when most of the resources I know are from being a doula who was the one providing the resources that the providers weren't giving. But ultimately, you know, I'm going to be able to do your lab work and give you diagnoses and write prescriptions, and the doula is going to be of comfort. I have said often that you should think of your doula potentially as your partner, your husband, who knows what they're talking about because you've seen the birth. And the nice part about having a doula, you may be so in love with your husband, he may know everything about you, but he's never seen you give birth. So for him, if you start crawling on the ground, making weird noises, he's going to be like, oh, no, this is weird. But then Haya's going to be like, actually, this is really normal. This is totally normal for her to be making these noises. And so your doula can actually be of great comfort to your partner also, especially if you have a little nervous partner, which some of y'all do.
Sounds like you've been here.
I have. I like this neighborhood. I live in this neighborhood. So that's helpful. Also, I can just walk to you, which is really nice.
I'm outside your room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, women's instincts, have someone who actually listens to them when you're reaching out to your providers. Other
Do you ever
questions?
do an interview with someone and be like, I don't think we're a match?
Yes, probably, but usually I feel like it's probably mutual. Probably.
I think there might be some questions on the left. We're on our left.
This one? That one I did, that one I did. That one we kind of did. This one? Oh my gracious. Okay, POV. Your patient's water broke at 41 weeks, but no sign of labor, and baby is still happy and kicking. Yeah. Have you ever waited it out for days before labor started naturally? Yes. My sister actually, which she's not here, but her water broke on a Monday, and then she started laboring almost immediately, but then her sewage backed up, so her labor stopped and she had to focus on fixing her plumbing. And so then Tuesday, so at this point she's still pregnant and her waters are open. Tuesday, no labor. Wednesday, no labor. Thursday, no labor. Finally on Thursday, she took some castor oil. And about 5 hours later, this baby's butt decided to start coming out, which no one was prepared for that. I wasn't there, but they handled it. Everything was fine. I think our longest so far of waters being open is 74 hours. Statistically, about 96% of people will have started contractions within the first 24 hours, and most people will be in active labor by 48 hours. And almost everyone has had their baby by 96. 96 hours of your waters being open is about where the research stops. But I guess you
It was an
could,
outlier.
yeah, I guess you could argue to go longer. It would really make, that would be a situation where we'd have conversations. We need to all be on the same page, make sure that everybody's feeling safe, provider and client. But it's also a variation of normal. Do midwives provide an alternative to the glucose drink? There are, we use Fresh Test, which actually recently just got its kosher symbol on it, so that's nice. Fresh Test is a powder, organic, non-GMO. We use that instead of the glucose drink, the glucola. We also offer the option of just doing finger sticks, evaluating your food with a food diary, because that to me also gives you functional information. So we offer that. There are practices, and technically we do too, offer the option of doing a 50 gram of another type of sugar like grape juice. But that is not going to be as accurate because all the lab work is based on glucose, that type of sugar, and other fruit juices are different, so they're not as accurate. But there's alternatives to everything.
Why don't they do an A1C? I can't remember.
A1C is not as accurate during pregnancy because of, I think it's because of the proliferation of red blood cells, like you have more, so it's not,
Oh, it's like
yeah, something like that.
A1C.
It shows what your glucose levels have been for the past 3 months. 90 days is the lifespan of a red blood cell. So it kind of, and glucose sticks on the red blood cell, I think. Don't quote me on that. What is the protocol for Group B strep? We kind of talked about this. Our protocol is a conversation. The standard of care is to get IV antibiotics during labor. We talk about, you can just say no. You also don't even have to do the test if you don't want to, but we talk about the risks and benefits, and we want to make sure that you're comfortable with the risks that you may be taking. And if you're comfortable with the risks that you may be taking and we're comfortable with them, then we'll move forward.
Have there been any times when a client wants to take on a risk, but they don't want to do a certain procedure and you didn't feel comfortable with it?
Not really. I honestly think maybe we're lucky and maybe it'll come up. I'd like to think that the way that I provide or we provide care, that we really are creating a level of trust. And so we're like kind of all on the same page already. I'm sure it could happen. But no, not really. Not particularly. We also are extremely respectful of people's choices and autonomy. So, yeah, thank you. Go on. What advice would you give to moms whose first births were via emergency C-section to reappropriate the natural process of birth, regain trust in their ability to birth naturally? International, I don't know, coalition, anyways, it's the International Cesarean Awareness Network is a good resource. There's also VBAC facts and evidence-based birth. Also, the thing that most people are really terrified of and what they're counseling you on when they're talking about doing a vaginal birth after a previous cesarean is a uterine rupture. And a uterine rupture, when you've had a previous cesarean, there's a 98% chance that you will not have a uterine rupture. So we talk about that. We just talk about the facts. We talk about the statistics. If you're a good candidate and you want to have a home birth, there are many practices who will do a vaginal birth after cesarean at home. This is a conversation, but the recommendation is to attempt a vaginal birth. It is generally the safest for the baby, the second baby. And also, when we talk about emergency C-sections, that language is used a lot, and very rarely are emergency C-sections emergencies. They're usually C-sections.
It just means that it wasn't an elective C-section.
Exactly. It means that you didn't actively choose to get a C-section, that the goal was a vaginal birth and it's switched, but rarely is it actually an emergency.
Makes it sound really hysterical.
Exactly. And usually they're like, yeah, I think you should get a C-section. And then 45 minutes later, you're still sitting there.
Right.
And then you will get one eventually, but I've had emergency C-sections that were put off for like 4 hours type of thing. Make it make sense.
Can you talk about what a true emergency C-section would look like?
Like a
Timeline-wise or like energy-wise, you know?
Well, hopefully it's pretty good energy, but generally it would be like, usually it's something happening with the baby and they're not recovering. But a real emergency, they should have the baby out from calling to a C-section to doing it about 10 minutes.
Wow.
It should be pretty fast.
What would be different indications for that? Reasons?
Like the baby has their heart rate has gone down and is not coming back up. Maybe if the mom was bleeding in a way before the baby was born, signs or symptoms of a uterine rupture would certainly be an emergency. Placenta abruption.
Which means
The placenta comes off the uterine wall. It's not supposed to do that till after the baby comes out. So if it does that before the baby comes out, that is an emergency and should be dealt with emergently. Oh,
how would a midwife deal with that at home?
the uterine rupture.
What placental abruption, uterine rupture?
Well,
Let's start by
yeah.
the fear, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
start by how common this would be.
Right,
since
because
it's-
Right.
let's say like mother would ask you that,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Right. So we also, there is, if you're having a vaginal birth after cesarean at home, there is risk, and you have to be aware of it. There is risk for the ultimate worst, but that is exceptionally rare, especially if we are not augmenting you with Pitocin. And it's just your body whose goal is always to protect itself and be kind to itself, because your body doesn't want to hurt, whose goal is to do this safely, but we're monitoring. If you have had a previous cesarean, then, if you have gestational diabetes on top of it and it's not well controlled, then we might have to talk about if this is safe. We're going to try to keep everything else normal. But we do a decent number of vaginal births after cesarean. How people are counseled, there's a thing called bias counseling. So if someone is talking about, because a uterine rupture is very scary. If it happens, it is very scary. I've only ever seen it happen once. She was on Pitocin, etc. Everybody was fine.
is that a big app?
Yeah.
Is that-
Yes. And that was at the hospital because, yes. But there's bias counseling, right? So I could say there is, after you've had a C-section, it is your chance of having a uterine rupture doubles, right? So it can go from 0.5% to 1%. Or I could say the chance of having a uterine rupture goes from 0.5% to 1%. Or I could say there's a 99% chance that you will not have a uterine rupture. Now, the 99% chance and saying you have a double chance, those are both biased. I'm trying to convince you should do a VBAC, or I'm trying to convince you should have a repeat C-section, right? If I just say the statistics jump from 0.5 to 1%, that is neutral counseling, and then you can make a decision that feels right for you. And a lot of counseling can be biased in that way. So if someone is counseling you, you should, and they say it doubles, you should be like, well, what are the actual numbers?
So that's the question. Like, how would you answer someone who asked you, how would you deal with a uterine rupture or placental rupture?
Well, if we saw signs or symptoms of a uterine rupture, which usually, if a uterine rupture is usually not catastrophic, it's usually like a window, we would transfer to a hospital.
And how much time do you have?
If it's not catastrophic, we should have plenty of time. It depends. I mean, that's a hard question. It depends. If you have a catastrophic rupture, you have 5 minutes, more or less. So if you have a catastrophic rupture and you're planning to birth at home, we have talked about this because it is a possibility, but
And
exceptionally rare.
What are the possibilities? What are the statistics of that?
It jumps from 0.5% to 1%. Yeah.
And so this.
And I don't know if
primarily-
that's catastrophic. I believe those are the main statistics, more or less. I don't know if that's all uterine ruptures or just catastrophic ruptures.
So the risks is usually with women who've had previous cesareans.
Mhm.
With a woman who hasn't had a previous
Uh,
cesarean,
yeah,
then
it's like 0.5%. You still have a risk of uterine rupture even if you've never had a C-section.
and what about placental abruption?
Placental abruption, you're going to see a lot less. Placental abruption, you're far more likely to see in someone who has a risk factor. A risk factor being anything that would put a lot of pressure on the placenta, like hypertension, so elevated blood pressure, because that makes your vessels smaller, which is going to increase pressure. If you smoke cigarettes, if you do cocaine, all of these things are going to put you at a higher risk for placental abruption. So that one you're not going to see as often. It is possible. And anything like that, like if we're really concerned, we're not wasting. We're calling 911 or we're putting you in our car, whichever one's going to go the fastest, you
And
know.
so you're.
But I've never had to do that. Just,
And do you
yeah.
have all the equipment you need in your car and are you trained?
Oh, yeah.
for-
Yeah, we are trained in neonatal resuscitation. We're well trained in breech, which not everybody is in systems. We have all the meds. We have oxygen tanks, which people don't really use, but you always have to bring them in because it's a good omen. You bring your oxygen tank. You never use it, but you always bring it. Yeah, we have all equipment for common emergencies that are not common,
Can
but
I ask this?
common.
I think interesting.
What do you think about when the community that has been present?
they're almost
I
all,
mean, present.
they're always present.
They're present. They're present?
Yep. They might
I
not,
had
they,
someone like
yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, it's going to be different in different households. So how you approach Nita is completely up to you. No judgment here. You can do whatever you want.
You can have a clean birth
Of course, but some people, anyways, usually the last birth out, usually they're like right there at the door. And it depends, there's a range of what people are comfortable with. Usually they're right at the door. The last one I had where the husband was definitely, following all the rules, if you will. As soon as the baby came out, I was like, let's go. And we put on her snood, covered her, and we are like, come on in. And he came in. We did that. And then when we needed to do other things, then we sent him away. But usually they're pretty close. There's not many places you can go. Yeah. They'll be like davening right there. And then they'll come by.
My husband did go to sleep with my last birth.
Yeah, I mean, you find that. But yeah. That was a stress reaction, a stress response.
Also, doulas sometimes send husbands to sleep. So
Yeah,
yeah.
sometimes
Energy.
sometimes the nervous energy is not totally welcomed, if you will. And that's another, and a good doula will recognize, oh, this man needs a task because he's not helping with this. And then you give him a list of all the things the midwife wants to eat, and I'm happy to write a grocery list. We did that one. Yeah, focusing on breathing, breathe in and out, you're fine. And that we did too. I think there might, okay, this says any tips dietary to reduce risk of premature rupture of membranes. The primary risk of early rupture of membranes is actually infection, but it's a possibility that vitamin C. I feel like people who have a lot of vitamin C have really strong amniotic sacs. I don't know if there's any science behind that at all, but it's an idea that someone floated in my head about 10 years ago. And now I'm like, how much citrus, like if a baby's born completely in the bag of waters, I'm like, did you eat a lot of citrus in your, because that is possible that your water never breaks. Your baby's born in the bag of waters and they have psychic abilities. So those are goals if you want to. It's called being like, well, culturally, culturally there's different things. They say the Dalai Lama was always born in Kal, which means in the bag of waters. Some call it being born behind the veil.
Born in a bubble.
Yeah, in the bubble. In the bubble. Show her.
Because you have to also breathe the bubble.
The average water breaks on it spontaneously. Like if we remove someone breaking your waters, around 8 centimeters. Is it the same? I don't know. I mean, I remember one time a doctor at the hospital was like, how do you he was like, what's the trick of having babies being born in the bag of waters? Because in the hospital, it's like 1 in 80,000, but I had like 5 or 6. And I remember this resident, she was like, what's the trick? And I was like, I'll tell you the trick. And she's like, okay, what is it? And I was like, don't break their waters. Yeah, just don't ever do that. And then maybe it'll happen to you. I don't think she followed my advice, but you know.
Someone said that just in the source, she heard that Maestro
Who's that?
Moses.
Well, then it's probably true. Yeah.
Is there a reason that people's water break, like an evidence-based statistic about why people's water break before they're in labor?
Not that I know of. My understanding is we have 11 theories of why human labor starts, and we do not know why human labor starts. I know that 5 to 10% of people's water breaks before labor begins. Most people's doesn't. In the case of my nephew, my sister and I both agree that he was very smart because he knew that if the midwife discovered he was breech beforehand, she would have had to go get surgery. So he broke his waters first, because a home birth midwife's not going to check you if your waters are broken until the 4th day. And then by the time she checked him, it was too late. Yep. And in a good way. And then he was able to come out. Yeah.
Have you seen any correlation between postpartum hemorrhage and anemia?
No, I feel like not the correlate. Being anemic doesn't make you at higher risk for hemorrhage, but it makes you higher risk for being completely fatigued and obliterated if you were to hemorrhage. But it doesn't make you hemorrhage. It's just you have less of a threshold to cover you. And breast milk is a blood product, so not being anemic is helpful for that too.
If you hemorrhage at one birth, you more likely to hemorrhage.
Theoretically, but it's also, we don't necessarily see that, especially if you had a birth in a hospital setting where they were just doing their jobs. It's all that messing with you after you have the baby blocks the normal flow of oxytocin, and oxytocin is our love hormone. It helps you love this baby, and it also helps your uterus contract. And if there are strangers who are in your business looking at your business, you're less likely to have that oxytocin flowing. And in that case, you would potentially be more likely to have a hemorrhage, which is probably one of the reasons why they do the Pitocin. So yeah, they have the answer. I don't mean to talk bad about them. It does sound like for FDA approved, you have to bring contractions, but it's only FDA approved to contract your uterus to prevent hemorrhage or to stop hemorrhage.
So after the baby comes out, there's a wound that now needs to, you know, the uterus needs to. So that's why they do it.
Right.
To help it go quicker.
And we have to be mindful too that they're trained this way. They believe that these things are really important. It's not like they're being bad at their job. We just have a different point of view in how we approach it.
Just have you ever been to a birth where like right up until birth the husband was still not on board with the idea, but he just like did his own thing, not being in the space?
Or they're like respectful enough to let you do your own thing, but is not approving. Almost always that husband is one of our biggest supporters afterwards. Almost always. The one is like, I don't know about this, and then he's like, that was beautiful. It was beautiful. And then he's even if he was looking away, he can hear that it's beautiful. Like he can tell. And then they're telling all their friends. And now we're in your neighborhood more often because of him. Yeah.
And how many times do you come?
Our practice comes at least 5 times. Yeah. Wow. So we come at the 24-hour mark. If you've had a baby at around the 24-hour mark, they do certain tests on the baby. So we're doing those because a midwife in New York State is licensed to be your baby's primary care provider for the first 28 days of their life. So if your baby's healthy, we're like, yeah, you don't need to go anywhere. We can do all of this for you. So we come and do the state mandated testing for the babies. We check for congenital heart defects in the babies. And obviously we're checking in on you. We come back on day 4 to 5. We come back between weeks 2 and 3, around week 6, and then 12 weeks.
Checking it on you while the baby's on and on.
Yep. Or next year, wherever we're checking on both of y'all. Y'all can be in whatever, however. I've seen it all at this point. So
Are there any special considerations that you have for clients who are from and doing the risk on this one?
well, we talk about, well, because we tell them to talk to their moil. I have a hard time saying that word, but thank you. Because some, well, I know generally most people want your baby to be at least 6 pounds. We can monitor for jaundice. Some moils are more, ask more questions than others. And some really prefer that your baby receives vitamin K injection after birth, but it's usually not a requirement. Is that what you're asking about?
Just in general.
Yeah.
Like, do you come?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, like, will you come differently? Like, you'll come on day 9, which is the day after the risk.
No, not usually. Yeah. I mean, if you had a question about it, you obviously could send a photo, but usually the person who's going to have a better answer is the man who's seen a lot more than I have. I'm like, ask him. Yeah.
Does your practice have a registrar? Like, how do we declare the baby as like a legal citizen?
Well, we just file your birth certificate just like they do at the hospital. You fill it out the form on we have electronic medical charting. So we send messages, you see all your labs, you have access to everything more or less. In there, in ours, there's a tab and it's the birth certificate, and you put in all your, the same things you had to fill out on the worksheet if you've ever filled one out at the hospital that you did by hand. And then the baby's born, and on day 8 or whatever day you choose to tell us your baby's name, then we put it in and we send it to the state, and then you get your pretty rainbow birth certificate sent to your home with a social security card if you want one.
And what hospitals do you outsource like the 20-week
So we have provide a whole sonogram list. Usually a lot of our clients who live in this area go to Unique, which is in like Park Slope. There's also one in Diker Heights, I believe, or Dr. Rosenberg, who's out in Hewlett. That's where most people go. We can ultrasounds. We can facilitate ultrasounds almost anywhere though, so it's up to you.
So to a regular appointment, you come with a Doppler?
Mm-hmm. Or a fetoscope if some people choose not to use a Doppler.
Can you talk about
A fetoscope is essentially a stethoscope, but to hear the baby. But you can't hear anything until at least around 22 weeks. And then even then, it can be hard with the fetoscope. With the Doppler, you can usually hear about the earliest is around 10 weeks.
Why would someone not want to use a Doppler?
Well, early ultrasounds have been shown to show changes in mice, in their cell production in mice. It is certainly a tool that's used a lot in obstetrics. But some people have no interest in sound waves. A Doppler is ultrasonic waves, is ultrasound waves. It's less than an ultrasound, and we're doing it for like 30 seconds to a minute, maybe 3 minutes. So most people are fine with a Doppler, but some people are not. They don't have interest in those waves. We do, I don't want to say require, but we much prefer to use a Doppler in labor, because a fetoscope, if we really want to evaluate, you probably really do need to lay on your back, and you probably have to be quiet, which I wouldn't want to ask someone in labor to do that. Whereas a Doppler, I can chase you around and go like that, and you can do anything you need to do, and we'll do it real quick. I just want to be like, boom, boom, okay, good. We're trying to like find a balance to make sure that we're being safe and giving, but also like respecting the type of care that you want, Yeah, it is.
Do you find that in this community, a lot of women decline the ultrasounds or the 20-week scan?
No, but there are some, but you find them in every community. I don't think it's necessarily higher here. Mm-mm. Yeah.
Well, you have showered us with amazing information.
So I didn't do too bad.
No, you rocked it.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
And we also, whenever after we do a consult, we send an email with research. So the people who are like, why would you do a home birth? You can be like, here is the research that my midwives provided for me with statistics that can help you answer that question for yourself.
Useful for clinic
Yes,
friends and family.
exactly. And also remember, I mean, a midwife is the oldest, I would fight you and say it's the oldest profession in the world, because you can't have that one without that one. You know what I'm saying? So
Yay, thank you so,
Thank you.
so much. I want to thank our anonymous sponsor for tonight. It was done in schus of her new niece, and thank you, Hashem. All the brachas to her and her family and her beautiful new niece. And thank you so much, everybody. You guys are the best. We're gonna close this. Yay. Okay.